not just amongst the students, but amongst their parents as well. But Mr. Burden, one of the things I do want to talk about is the global pressures that are mounting on students today. I mean, we understand that the situations we're living in are much more complex than, let's say, 10 or 20 years ago, with social media, with the global economy, with pressures coming out from every direction. Do you feel like that is one of the reasons why students often go and move towards the consumption of drugs?
Well, I represent 19,500 school leaders, and one of the things they say to me as the biggest concern for them is young people's mental health. And part of the fragility of mental health is about social media, because if you're trying to define who you are as a human being, and you're doing it in part by how many people like you on Facebook or retweet you on Twitter, then you get a different sense of who you might be. And it might be that some of those young people then turn to drugs. But equally, listen to what the professor says. Actually, drug use overall appears to be either stabilised or declining. So it's important that we don't blame social media or the media for everything. We just need to stay very vigilant and help young people to navigate their way through a complicated world.
Right. Professor Johnson, now, as you state, drug usage within the UK might be stagnant, might be declining. Global figures also indicate that it is moving towards an upwards trend. And from a holistic viewpoint, I do want to talk about this a little more and talk about the state of mental health when we're talking about the youth globally, not just in the UK. What are some of the indicators that parents need to be looking out for people in medical stores need to be looking out for? What type of legislation do you think needs to be introduced in places with weak laws to make sure that this is being countered?
Well, I would be very careful about introducing more laws. They don't necessarily help. The so-called war on drugs that the United States has led and spent multi-billion pounds or multi-billion dollars on really has resulted in a lot of people getting locked up, but not actually dealing with the problem. The problem is not going to be solved by locking people up or by legislation. It's not that simple. If it was that simple, there would be no drug misuse in the United States, because they've got the strongest laws of any of the countries out there on drug use. And they've been locking up more people than anyone else in the world per head of population. So it isn't an issue of just simply passing a law. The other thing is some countries have got lots of strong laws, but they don't actually enforce them.
Right. Mr. Barton, now Professor Johnson makes a very important point. Criminalizing those that are involved in the drug usage doesn't really solve the problem. It doesn't really solve what is pushing them towards it. Now, as you mentioned, you represent a huge number of schools throughout the UK. In all of this, you talked about the fragility of mental health in the youth today. What can teachers, what can parents do to support young children, their journey? And what do you think needs to be done on that front?
I think there's probably two things. One, which Professor Johnson hints at, is a policy issue for government. Government needs to decide whether we continue to criminalise drugs in the way that we do, which we know drives the trade underground. That's a big policy decision for any government. But our responsibility for young people, I think, is to understand that the world is more complicated, to help parents to understand what the signs might be of their children getting involved in criminal activity related to drugs, and to help educate young people in a world which we know can leave them vulnerable, as to how do you show resilience to resist that? How do you say no if somebody offers you drugs? And that's something schools have always done, but we will need to redouble our efforts.